rapidly moving the goalpost. So they're no longer saying this was Hamas HQ. Now they're saying, oh, actually, Hamas HQ was really in the south. And Hamas the Hamas leaders all fled to the south. That's why even they acknowledge they haven't been able to get that many of top Hamas leadership. So now they're saying, okay, Khan Yunis, that's the real place where Hamas HQ is. So the story has dramatically shifted. And you'll recall, of course, Palestinians were told to flee northern Gaza. There was a line that was established. You must go to southern Gaza. Otherwise, you're going to be deemed a terrorist. We'll feel free to attack you, bomb your home, whatever, which they did quite dramatically in the north of Gaza. So now you have effectively, very close to all of 2 million residents of Gaza who are in southern Gaza. Khan Yunis is one of the places that people have fled to because that's where they were told to go under the assumption that they would be safe. Now, the bombing of southern Gaza has actually ramped up after those evacuation orders. It's not like it's ever really been a safe place. But Israel is now signaling, okay, since Hamas HQ wasn't in Al-Shifa, it's actually in Khan Yunis, and that's where Hamas leadership fled. Now we're going to start this more aggressive bombing campaign in the south. U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner was on the Sunday shows doing his duty, looking very uncomfortable, by the way, in this role. But anyway, we'll put that aside, raising alarms and concerns that the U.S. government has with this ramped up attack in the south. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We have been quite clear that Israel has every right to defend itself against the threat that it faces. That includes, by the way, the right to go after Hamas leadership, who they say now have fled to the southern part of Gaza and have sought refuge there. So in the event that we believe that Israel is likely to embark on combat operations, including in the south, we believe both that they have the right to do that, but that there is a real concern because hundreds of thousands of residents of Gaza have fled now from the north to the south at Israel's request. And we think that their operations should not go forward until those people, those additional civilians, have been accounted for in their military planning. And so we will be conveying that directly to them and have been conveying that directly to them. They should draw lessons from how the operation proceeded in the north, including lessons that lead to greater and enhanced protections for civilian life, things like narrowing the area of active combat, clarifying where civilians can seek refuge from the fighting.
So, very diplomatically, he's saying, listen, you bombed the hell out of northern Gaza. Yeah. You killed thousands upon thousands of civilians, thousands upon thousands of children. Maybe take some lessons from that as you move into southern Gaza.
Well, and to your point, this is where the Biden administration is really under the crunch with the Israeli government. Obviously, again, this is part of their messaging campaign in the media. This is part of how the Biden administration is negotiating with Israel, is what they're saying publicly on shows exactly like this. And, it's, Krystal, it's a very interesting state of affairs as of right now, because, again, we were just talking about the hospital. Some of the stuff is fully believable. We don't know that it's true, but it's entirely possible, again, that Al-Shifa was being used as a Hamas headquarters. It's entirely possible that Hamas, knowing, the ground invasion obviously was delayed and delayed and delayed as people were waiting for it, that Hamas cleared places and went to the south. But again, this has been happening over the last few weeks even. If the Israeli government says that it is doing absolutely everything it can to protect civilians within reasonable boundaries, and then people in the south aren't safe. It is an incredible problem for the Israeli government. It's an incredible problem for the United States government, especially given where public opinion is heading in the United States. And I think that's what the Biden administration understands, and it's why Reuters is reporting, I think, clearly from Qatari sources that any obstacles to this peace deal that we talked about earlier in the show are minor. I think is the term that the Qatari source used, quote, very minor, because the Biden administration has to answer questions exactly like this. And if Israel starts turning towards an operation more heavily in the south, they've already had problems with civilians being put in danger in the south. If they start turning in that direction, it's a huge problem, not just for the Israelis, but for the American government as well.
The Israelis care, Netanyahu, let me say, I don't like to speak in those blanket terms. When I say Israelis, I always mean the Israeli government cares about one thing, which is keeping Joe Biden on their side. And all of these little, there's all these leaks to the press about like, oh, they're really concerned. And behind the scenes, they're having these tough conversations.
Yeah.
And, they send this dude out who I've actually never heard of before to be like, oh, we're worried about the South, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's already very clear that until there is a U.S. willingness to say, you're not getting our money unless you stop bombing schools, bombing hospitals, indiscriminately bombing and killing civilians, nothing's going to change until the U.S., actually starts letting some votes go through the UN. And you did actually have them let one thing go through, which is about these quote unquote humanitarian pauses. But we know from what
The settlement leak. I mean, that's the Biden saying he might sanction settlers.
Settlers. So, I mean, that's like a little like maybe I'll do that. And that's very minimal in terms of what we could do with the incredible leverage that we have, the amount of money that we routinely send to Israel and the escalated $14 billion that we're planning to send right now, and the huge list of weapons that they tried to keep secret, by the way, from the American public of what exactly was being sent to Israel. And Ken Klippenstein and others were able to get their hands on specifically that list and reveal what has already been sent. So until the U.S. government is actually inclined to use any of that considerable leverage, Israel's going to do what they want. And, the population is traumatized by October 7th. They are convinced this is an existential threat. And so the polling shows some 80% don't really care that much about Palestinian civilian life. So I think, again, there's not going to be any change in the approach from the Israeli government until the U.S. does more than like leak to the Washington Post that, oh, we're so concerned and we really wish they would stop. And I was going to mention, with regard to this humanitarian pauses, we know from what Secretary Blinken reportedly told Netanyahu when he was there, it's not about actually bringing an end to the conflict. It's about buying time internationally and saving face so that the bombing campaign can continue for a lengthier period of time. I referred before to, the moving of the goalposts in terms of where Hamas HQ actually is. Put this up on the screen from the Financial Times. This is one of the things that people were pointing to. Israel signals operations in southern Gaza after hospital raid. Israel now believes several Hamas leaders have moved south, with some in Khan Yunis, the largest city in southern Gaza, according to several Western officials. Some of Israel's allies have asked them to be cautious in their operations in the south, where nearly 1 million Palestinians have fled after being assured it would be safer than the north. Now, first of all, we are seeing strikes in the south, they added, and second, operations in Khan Yunis can be incredibly difficult and destructive. Western officials said the scale and intensity of Israel's growing ground invasion of Gaza has caused concerns, despite consistent support for the country's right to, quote, defend itself. I don't think anybody meant that this requires ground operations of such a scope. And they've already started this bombing campaign, Emily, and already, very clear large death toll and large civilian death toll, because this is where everyone is now. This is where everyone was told to flee to, and this is where they fled to.
Yeah, and again, we were just talking about this. It's a increasingly big problem for the U.S. government, which public opinion is going to be a very, very tough pressure on Biden. In fact, we're going to talk about that with a guest today in all kinds of ways that, maybe even people didn't originally expect the political pressures that would fall on Joe Biden over this. I agree with you. I think, until there's completely foundationally different conversations about U.S. aid, which actually Tablet Magazine over the summer, very pro-Israel magazine, had a fascinating piece about how U.S. aid to Israel in some ways is bad for both the U.S. and Israel. It's a really interesting piece. I recommend people check it out. Until some of those foundational conversations start happening, I don't see how anything, dramatically changes. I do think the Biden administration is very aware of public opinion and is talking to the Israeli government about different things like this, and is probably applying some pressure, but, short of immense pressure, short of sort of foundational conversations about the nature of the support. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think there's without having conversations about the foundational questions, you don't get foundational change.
And you actually had a report, Bernie Sanders, who has not called for a ceasefire, notably. He came out and called for conditioning aid to Israel. And there was also a report that a number of, I think all Democratic senators have begun that conversation. So that has started to happen, at least within the Senate. But with Joe Biden, the support has been more or less lockstep. The other question here that has always been is, okay, so you completely flattened Gaza City. Now you're moving to the south to probably completely flatten southern Gaza as well. what the hell are you going to do after this mission accomplished moment?
That makes your people safer.
That's right. Yes. That makes that makes any sort of, sense, that has any sort of reasonable humanitarian potentially situation for Palestinians. Put this up on the screen. This was really eyebrow raising. This is from Al Monitor. Inside Israel's 3-day after options for Gaza amid government split. So I've got a short list here. Number 1, a role for Egypt. First option, which enjoys the greatest support among Israeli decision makers, is for Egypt to basically take control of the enclave in return for complete forgiveness of its massive foreign debt. I mean, this is very adjacent to the ethnic cleansing plan that was strategically released from the Israeli government and that many members of the far-right Israeli cabinet have been pushing for. Next one is from Ramallah to Gaza City. Second option, this is what the U.S. has been pushing for, is the Palestinian Authority's return to Gaza, which several Israeli decision makers regard as a bad idea. Simply put, it would torpedo the government's ultimate goal of severing all ties between itself and Gaza. And also, it would make it so that there was one unified leadership between the West Bank and Gaza, which would take off the table, their talking point of we have no one to negotiate with in terms of a two-state solution. So it would make a two-state solution more possible and more viable. So that they don't want that. Even though that's what the U.S. has been pushing. There are other problems, by the way, I'll get into in a minute with the idea that the PA could take over Gaza. And the last one is an international coalition. The third option is handing the keys to an international coalition consisting of Arab countries and or NATO, the EU, or the UN. We also have been floated as part of this international coalition, to which I would certainly say hell no.
Which, by the way, is basically how the West Bank and Jerusalem in particular is run right now. It's under the control of Jordan, but there's also international cooperation with how it works. And so we kind of have a test case of how well it works. And the answer is not very.
Yeah, well, so in the PA, that theoretically is the governing body in the West Bank, has zero legitimacy. And this is sort of intentional, again, from the Israeli government, has zero legitimacy within the West Bank. They are accurately, I would say, seen as effectively collaborators with the Israeli security establishment. And so that's why I say there's a lot of issues with the idea that you're just going to nation build and install your chosen ruler of, Mahmoud Abbas and the PA in the Gaza Strip, where they have zero, popular support or legitimacy. They already have no support also or legitimacy really in the West Bank either. Within that international coalition part, though, one of the things they float here as an idea that people are talking about is completely insane. They want to construct a huge artificial island off the coast of Gaza. Quote, "It will be cheaper and faster than rebuilding the Gaza Strip itself," a very senior former security official told this paper seeking to promote his brainchild. "There is technology, means, and money. Abu Dhabi and Dubai have huge numbers of such artificial islands, which have become hubs of tourism, commerce, housing, and infrastructure. It's relatively easy. It's cheap and will allow everyone to turn over a new leaf. The Gazans will receive new land with efficient infrastructure. There will no longer be a land border between Israel and Gaza." The source warned any attempt to rebuild Gaza is doomed, given the massive underground tunnel network into which everything could collapse. The underground city will suck up what is above it. Disaster is yet to come, the former security official said. The island could be a pretty good solution. So they're pitching this like it's some resort destination and it'll be great for everyone. The whole nature of this conflict, which often gets framed in religious terms, but it's really a land dispute. And so what you're talking about here is completely pushing them off of the land that they are claiming and entitled to, by the way. And it's also very revealing about the extent of the utter devastation and destruction which has already been unleashed in the Gaza Strip, that they're like, there's nothing to go back to. We can't even rebuild it. It'd be easier to build a whole separate island where we can then keep you in prison than to try to rebuild Gaza City, which is uninhabitable now.
This is the most Western galaxy brain solution that you could possibly joke about.
It's like some shit that Elon Musk would come up with.
It's satire because, again, to your point, this is a land conflict, and the land conflict conflict. Obviously, whoever came up with the solution, whenever security officials talking to the media and floating the solution, understands that fundamentally this is a land conflict. But they have this end of history Western galaxy brain idea that it just needs more land, that people will be satisfied if you just give them a brand new hunk of fabricated land in the middle of the ocean, as opposed to the land is important to them because there are holy sites on the land. The land is important to them. They're fighting, they're spilling blood over the land because of that particular land and its connection to their families, to their faiths, to their sense of honor and dignity. And so this idea that we'll just create new land and everyone will be happy with it is, again, like, it is so perfectly representative of this like end of history Western idea about how to solve conflicts. And we have a really hard time understanding here in the United States, in our sort of comfortable world, why people would fight that bitterly over their land. It's hard for people to wrap their brains around, but there are holy sites in Gaza. It's not just the West Bank. There are holy sites in Gaza that matter a lot to people.
I think it actually sort of reminds me of the thinking of some like libertarians and also a lot of liberals that's like, or neoliberals, I should say, that's like, oh, your factory town in the US is destroyed.
Yes. Move.
Just move to New York
Move.
or just move to like San Francisco and learn to code. And it's like, I say this as someone who still lives in the hometown where I was born and raised.
Yeah.
Place is important to people. You know, this is, no, LA or San Francisco or whatever is not my home. This is my home, and that matters to me. So yeah, I mean, it's just, I guess what I'll say finally on all of this is all of these options are bad. All of them are horrific. You know, you have a situation now where in the name of quote unquote eradicating Hamas, which is an impossible goal, you've killed thousands upon thousands. At the number I saw, it's between 12 and 16,000 civilians killed at this point. You know, huge number of children killed, huge number of children orphaned. And for every Hamas person that you have taken out, how many more radicals have you created with this destruction? So, you know, one of the things we keep talking about is the lessons that should have been learned after 9/11. And there is no doubt that the actions we took after 9/11 actually made us less safe. And I think that's incredibly clear here as well. And it becomes even clearer when you look at the preposterous ideas that are being floated for the post-war scenario. Everything from, you know, outright ethnic cleansing, pushing people completely off of the land into the desert in Egypt and basically using Egypt's debt load to force their compliance. And Israel, I don't think there's any doubt at this point that is their top choice. The only question is whether the US, Egypt, and other players are, cajoled and convinced to go along with it.
And whether that makes anyone more safe, because one of the reasons Egypt doesn't want that is they think it will actually advance the Muslim Brotherhood's cause, because you have a bunch of radicalized people who just watched their land, again, turned into a, quote, parking lot, to quote Max Miller, and are now in a new country where there are sort of even the embers of the Muslim Brotherhood, and you can easily come back in and imagine how that makes Israel significantly less safe again.
Yeah, that's true too. And then, you know, everything from that, from the ethnic cleansing solution to the let's build them their own island, which also, by the way, pushing them off their land is, you know, I would say that is still ethnic cleansing. But anyway, that's where we are. That's what we know. And it's hideous. I mean, it's just horrendous what is happening. And, you know, it's very bleak what the future could look like as well, even after they have their quote unquote mission accomplished moment. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.